It's the Commissioner of Agriculture and Commerce, the one and only Andy Gipson. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing good, Paul. Good morning to you. How are you today?
Okay, sir. Oh, man, big day yesterday, and I'm glad to hear the firsthand report about this because a lot of times when we hear or write or see this written in the old papers, it's not the same thing. So, well, I want to know from your perspective. How did it go yesterday?
Well, thank you. We were really pleased with the way it turned out. You know, when we announced this just about 3 weeks ago, we didn't know if anybody would come or what kind of response we would get, but we really had all the key decision makers in the Jackson and Hinds County area at the table under one roof at this crime summit. We called it Rebuilding the Walls of Safety Crime Summit yesterday. We had everyone from the Commissioner of Public Safety, my friend Sean Tyndall, to the Mayor Jackson, Chokwe Lumumba. We had District Attorney Jody Owens from Hinds County. We had the Undersheriff for Hinds County there, and the new Assistant Chief for the Capitol Police. We had state representatives there, Ronnie Crudup, who's also involved in the local community. So we had a lot of good discussion, and then we had about between 160 and 175 people show up from the Jackson area to talk about finding solutions to this crime wave that is plaguing the capital city. And a lot of businesses, matter of fact, Iron Horse Grill sponsored the lunch yesterday because that's how interested they are. So we had a lot of good discussion for about an hour leading into this on confronting what everyone knows is the problem. And then we had about an hour panel discussions afterwards, and I opened it up to the people because I have confidence in the people's wisdom, and they submitted these questions. I brought them today.
I want to hear them. We got plenty of time, so just slow and surely. But were there any consensus on some ideas that are just not apparent?
Yes.
And those are the ones thinking out of the box when you start talking to different people, which is a good source to go to.
Right. And so my role yesterday was to serve as the moderator of this meeting, and that's really what I did. But we talked about the criminal justice system from the time of the youth, of the young people that we're talking about, and activities that they have access to or don't have access to, all the way to arrest, incarceration, sentencing, holding, just simply putting someone in jail during the pendency of the trial, and having trials and how to have trials more effectively. And then, of course, post-release. We talked about the full gamut of it, but the one thing that people out there need to know that came out, and if you don't know this, you should know it, as of right now, there is no detention center in the city of Jackson that is available to house these criminals that are arrested. The law enforcement is doing their job. We had the chief of Jackson Police Department, James Davis, there on the panel. He spoke. The officers are doing their work. What happens is there's nowhere to put these people who are arrested, and they're being released on bond. We saw that with one of the Mudbug shooters. He was out on bond because there was nowhere to put him. And
wait a minute. You're talking about the jail cells that are available within the confines of the jurisdiction of the Jackson Police Department. There are no open jail cells to put these people into as far as a holding tank.
That's right. That's what the chief said, and I think that's one of the key problems we have to confront is not only are there not cells available to hold criminals or those who are arrested for crimes, but there's no the situation in the Hinds County Jail in Raymond is under a consent decree with the federal government, and it's under a lot of restrictions, so they're not taking prisoners as well. So one of the key things that came from yesterday was the realization, and I think everyone agrees, I know I agree, we got to have jails. We got to have a place to put folks who commit crimes. They know if they commit a crime, they're going to get out. And on top of that, one thing I learned yesterday was in 2016, and this was before Mayor Lumumba's administration, the city of Jackson entered into an agreement with the ACLU, and we all know who the American Civil Liberties Union is, that basically they agreed not to arrest or not to jail people for misdemeanor crimes. So you have a generation now since 2016 of young people who've come up committing misdemeanors, which can be fairly serious crimes, robbery, burglary, so forth, with no enforcement.
Yeah, but wait a minute, now that could have been changed at the next board meeting or the next council meeting, could it not?
Well, one of the questions was, one of the people asked the question, how do we change that? And the mayor's response was correct. He said the only way we can change it is to get back to the negotiating table with the ACLU and amend that agreement. There was some lawsuit that was brought to stop, enforcement of misdemeanors in Jackson, and for whatever reason in 2016, Jackson entered into that agreement. So I think it was a productive discussion.
That's amazing. How many of those misdemeanors have turned to felonies? Anybody know that?
Nobody's tracking.
In other words, when the misdemeanor goes out and he or she's released back on the street after 1, 2, or 3 misdemeanors, then that turns into a felony.
That's what the chief said. Chief Davis, he was absolutely right. He said that's the lesson these kids have been learning. But there was a lot of discussion about plans for the detention center, getting it complete in the near term, and Chief Davis did say as soon as that's done, he said those days will be over. But that will not resolve this ACLU agreement. And another question that came up, what about all these reforms, criminal justice reform lawsuits brought by the MacArthur Justice Center and different bail requirements, bond requirements that have been lowered. And so a lot of that goes into the criminal justice reform pendulum that has been swinging. And you saw the recall of the liberal district attorney in California just the other day. The pendulum has swung too far to the left, and we have less jail space, and we have less prison space than we've had in a long time in this state, and we need to swing back the other way and build jails if we need to.
I agree with you. So it sounds like what you're telling me, to counteract these things, it's nothing the city council could do, possibly nothing the legislature could do.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's going to have to be handled through the adjudication, take a lawsuit against. Would the city have to file that lawsuit, saying that this has been injurious to us and this is what's happening, and ask for a cancellation? Sounds like you got to go before court to get this thing done one way or the other. Most of these
on the misdemeanor issue, that's correct. I've made notes. By the way, one thing we agreed to do yesterday was to have a follow-up meeting. I'm shooting for late August on action items. We want to have action, not just talk about this. And on my first bullet point here is ACLU consent decree. Find out exactly what needs to happen to get that reversed or mitigated. But beyond that, there are some good things that are in play, and one of them is, I think, was announced. District Attorney Jody Owens announced, and it's been previously reported that there will be new judges that will be assigned by the Supreme Court, I think, through the funding that the legislature authorized this past session. The new judges, new assistant DAs to help prosecute these cases. One of the public comments was there have only been 3 trials since 2017 in one of the Hinds County Circuit districts. What do we do to get trials going again? We offered, and they've accepted to hold the trials in our large facilities like the Coliseum if they need to have more room to spread out, to feel safe, to for COVID purposes. If that's one of the holdups. So a lot of good things, a lot of good traction, but the issues are not just it's not just a matter of one particular silver bullet. It's intervening with these young people before they become criminals, and it's all the way to following through with the arrest, detention, conviction,
all the way to recidivism,
prison, and then release. And a lot of people said, get them back to work. Why can't we put these folks to work? Why can't we have work programs? And so much of that's driven by federal requirements now. The biggest takeaway, I think, for the people who are listening is right now we don't have a place in the capital city of the state of Mississippi to jail people.
Is that what the National Guard Armory is going to be if you had your way?
Well, there were several questions about the Armory, and I can answer all of them.
We'll do that. Also, Ron DeSantis had a statement yesterday. I want to play it. Figures into this. And I think Andy Gipson would probably say the same thing. Well, I know he would say the same thing. But what is unique about the statements you'll hear from Ron DeSantis when we come back. It's a statement on where we are as a people in this country, where there would be a lot of people attack him for this statement. And that's ludicrous, and I'll explain when we come back. That on SuperTalk and the Gallo Show, streaming to you on SuperTalk TV and also Channel 70 on the C Spire TV platform. And our C Spire text line is 601-879-4395. And always encourage folks. We had somebody said, why the hell would we even make an agreement with ACLU? Well, we didn't. It was the Jackson City Council. I think I heard you say prior to Lumumba, and that probably was brought to the table because of a lawsuit, as you mentioned. So yeah. I don't know the details of that.
Well, what was described was there was a lawsuit by ACLU alleging in 2016 that there was too much enforcement of misdemeanor crimes against young people in Jackson, and so somebody, I don't know if it was the council or the former mayor, somebody entered into a consent decree to stop enforcing misdemeanors in Jackson. Go ahead.
Before you get to, and I know you want to explain, some other people are asking this. Is there a difference between, do you normally arrest and someone with a misdemeanor? Is that normal?
Or
it's just a case-by-case situation?
Well, it depends on the situation, the gravity of the situation. But what's happened, according to the chief of police yesterday, was repeat offenders, misdemeanor after misdemeanor after misdemeanor. Young people don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to become a violent criminal. Yeah. It's a pattern of behavior, and they just get released on their own recognizance over and over and over. And so they have learned, rightfully they learn, there's no consequence to what they're doing, and it just gravitates to this violent crime way we see now. And we've got to do something to stem the tide of lawlessness, and outlaws have to understand there are consequences. There will be consequences if they break the law.
Yeah. Is there any difference between holding a prisoner and arresting a prisoner?
Well, yes, you can. There's holding. A prisoner can be held until they can be transferred to another, long-term facility. One of the questions was, are neighboring,
even if they're not legally arrested?
Well, if they have to be arrested.
Well, I was going to say this.
Well, there was a lot of discussion about mentally ill, about homelessness in the city. Yeah. And these are folks who necessarily are not committing crimes, but they have nowhere to go. So a lot of discussion about mental health resources. The chief talked a good deal about that, about homelessness, about finding a place where folks can go to be held safely, but not arrested. So that's a different issue. But committing a crime involves an arrest.
Before we left, I was asking you about the facility itself, and you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, we had a lot of questions about the Armory. One question was, what's the time frame? I've got it cleaned out. I've already met with Archives and History. They blessed our efforts. The exterior is pretty much complete. We got to replace the glass. We got to mortar the walls on the inside, smear them with concrete or mortar them like they used to be. We got to build some bleachers in there and put a HVAC system in, and we'll be ready to roll. And my timeline is by the end of the summer, by the beginning of fall, have it ready. And I offered it yesterday, and it was well received as a multi-agency task force staging area to fight crime, not only on the fairgrounds but around the fairgrounds throughout the capital downtown area, as far as we need to go.
Not the metro, but just the capital city area.
Well, as far as we need to go, we'll partner with JPD to go as far as they want to go if they can use this facility. We also announced yesterday a major hire that we're making effective July 1st. We're really excited to have Jimmy Herzog, who's the immediate past deputy director of the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. He's coming to work for us at the Department of Agriculture, and he'll be running the security fairgrounds, the first chief of security on the fairgrounds. He'll be working with all these different agencies. He's a veteran law enforcement officer.
Commissioner, was the mayor of Jackson at this important meeting?
He was.
Very good.
He was there. He was very engaged. I thanked him for coming. We had a good conversation. I learned some things from what he shared. I think he probably picked up some things from what other folks shared. One of the questions about the detention center, when is Jackson going to get one? He had some rather detailed plans about efforts underway now to complete a detention center. Somebody asked if our Armory was going to have a detention center. The answer is it does. It actually is built into the structure itself, a holding facility. But again, that'd not be a permanent jail, but a place to hold folks for safekeeping until they can be transferred to a more permanent situation. And then the last question about the Armory was who's going to pay for it, and the answer is the fairgrounds. Is no tax money. The fairgrounds, a lot of people don't know this, but it's 100% special fund agency, which means that it lives off of the private monies that come in from the events that are held on the fairgrounds. So we run it like a business. And just like any other business, like we made a capital investment to put a well down to have water for our events, we're going to make that capital investment to develop this security facility, the Armory, that will benefit not only the fairgrounds, but it will benefit the entire metro area. We believe
this is kind of dovetailed into what is happening on the national scene as far as guns, and I've got to speak to you about that.
Yeah.
Certainly,
a lot of discussion about guns.
A lot of discussion. Yeah. Here's what I was talking about on Ron DeSantis. For people to actually condemn him for seeing things like this shows how bad we have become as human beings in this country.
I think a lot of the problems that we see in society are outgrowths of the fatherlessness crisis. And if you had every kid in America had a loving father in the home, we would have far, far fewer problems that we would have to deal with as a society. If there's a lot of problems, but if you could just snap your finger and do one thing, and you did this where the fathers were in the home, you would not even need to worry about a lot of these other problems.
How in the heck can you even challenge that? Because factually, biologically, psychologically, whatever way you want it, that is, if we started off Monday,
yeah,
and for some reason we woke up and we had a majority of people, maybe back to the 60s or even early 70s, there were fathers in the home, most of this would disappear.
He's absolutely right. Yeah, everything we're talking about, from the youth problem all the way to the recidivism, it's a lack of the family structure. It's the breakdown of the home, and it begins with the absence of fathers. One of the constables in Rankin County, my friend Barry Bean, called me the other day. He's been involved in boys and girls clubs, and one of the realities is these young people who are troubled, who they bring under their wing, they have a lot of emphasis on sending Mother's Day cards. They try the same emphasis for Father's Day cards, and there's nowhere to send the cards. These kids don't know who their father is. The father's gone, hadn't been in the picture for years, and that's where we are as a society. If we don't wake up and realize that these systemic problems, they're huge problems, but they begin with a very simple problem, and that is the breakdown of the home, the absence of fathers.
I got to tell you, some the reasons I shake my head and just exhausted about just this topic really is that 99% of what we're talking about is because of bad leadership. It really is. Bad decisions made all the way back to Lyndon Johnson, and even a majority of leaders would tell you that did more harm than good. And up to today, and even in these municipalities. Yeah. You are a pretty darn good and well-respected lawyer, and I know you in Judd A for a long time too in the House of Representatives. But I want you to hear this from yesterday and our president.
I have issued executive orders within the power of the presidency to be able to deal with everything having to do with guns, gun ownership, whether or not you have to have a waiting, all the things that are within my power. But what I don't want to do, and I'm not being facetious, I don't want to emulate Trump's abuse of the Constitution and constitutional authority.
Now, did you get that? I mean, first of all, here's what he says. He has it. All he's got to do is
I have issued executive orders within the power of the presidency to be able to deal with everything having to do with guns, gun ownership.
Everything that has to do with gun or gun ownership, I have the power as executive orders.
Whether or not you have to have a waiting,
if it's whether or not to have a waiting, I have the executive orders.
Things that are within my power. What I don't want to do, and I'm not being facetious, I don't want to emulate Trump's abuse of the Constitution.
Yeah, and he's talking about the bumper stocks, which is an addition to a firearm.
Well, he's leaving out the Constitution, the Second Amendment, and if we have time, I will talk about the gun
when we
issue.
Come back. Yeah. When we come back, I'll give you the final thoughts here. Yeah. That is bogus. Yeah. If that's the case, then why are we even having this conversation? Go on and do it. Right. Make the mandates. This is the guy that is the commander-in-chief that we have to live with all the way through this year, 2 more. Midterms are more important than ever before. Andy Gipson's with us, Mike Cheney, 837. Back, final segment with the Commissioner of Agriculture, the one and only Andy Gipson. All right, sir, good. It's all yours.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to run through a few of these questions here. Let's start with the guns. Somebody asked, how do we prevent private sales and black market sales of these weapons? And that's a great question. There are very stringent laws on buying weapons, on buying firearms. Federal law requires, certain ages, certain requirements. And all these weapons that are getting into the hands of these kids, somebody's breaking the law, giving them to them or buying them for them, or they're buying them on the black market. That is a huge problem, and I think it's just going to take increased enforcement. But we don't want to take away people's Second Amendment constitutional freedoms to keep and bear arms. Most Mississippians have a gun. Most Mississippians use it to protect themselves and not to hurt anybody else. It's these violent criminals that are abusing the law. They're not going to abide by the law no matter what Congress does to change it. For one of our youth counselors there today, what are the inner city programs that youth could join to avoid becoming delinquents? We're going to develop a list of those programs. That's one of the things that came out of the meeting. What do we do about the culture in Jackson that allows and to encourage our youth to commit violence? That goes back to the family. It goes back to the church. One of our guests there yesterday was Rebecca Cabot. Her daughter was killed in Jackson last year. Raquela Brown was her name, and she said, hire more dispatchers, hire more officers, give them a pay raise, reach out to the victims and family, and enforce the restrictions on drugs and guns over communication. I think she hit the nail on the head. Enforce the laws we already have and empower our law enforcement to do that. Somebody asked about a curfew. The mayor said that they've tried a curfew in the past, and even the youth expert that we had there said that, curfews don't work because people who are going to break the law are going to break it with or without a curfew, and it doesn't do anything to help the situation. One of the big questions was, what happens with 911 call centers? Who has primary responsibility for taking 911 calls? In the city of Jackson, it is JPD. Out of the city, it's Hinds County SO. Capitol Police also has the authority to respond, and there was a lot of positive discussion about working together on all those fronts. And the last thing I'll mention here, engage local faith communities to host mental health counseling services, and train clergy on crisis response. I think that's a great idea, and we'll be reaching out to all the area pastors. This is a huge problem, Paul. I mean,
absolutely.
It didn't get this way overnight. It's taken decades. Well, it's going to take a time and effort, and everybody pulling the same direction to address it.
You have to divide it almost in two different things here. We got a rat problem. So number one is, how do we get rid of the rats we have right now, and how in the future prevent further rats from coming in?
Yeah.
I want to simplify this, but you've got criminals on the street now. How do we get control of crime in the state now? And then the future is a long-term cultural problem.
Yeah.
So you almost have to divide those into two different things, don't you?
You do. You have to address them both. And the mayor, to his credit, he's focused on a long-term solution, reaching out to the youth. At the same time, like you said, we have to have action now on the criminals that are out there on the streets today. There's not time to wait to rehabilitate them. They have to be enforced.
We don't have much time here, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Yesterday, they did pass a bill in the House. Your thoughts on that?
Which bill?
Have you seen it? Wednesday, a part of a slate of bills aimed at curbing mass shootings, gun violence. The House voted to increase the age required to purchase a semi-automatic rifle from 18 to 21. Polling shows that a majority of people in this country don't have a problem with that.
Well, it's another example of, I think it's a talking point that people are using to try to say they did something. The reality is criminals are going to break the law no matter what the law is. If they have a gun illegally, if they acquire it illegally for ill purposes, if they're abusing drugs and have one, they're breaking the law. So another law, I don't think that's the answer. And my concern is This is a step toward the Joe Biden agenda, the Obama agenda of taking away our Second Amendment freedoms. We can never give up our freedoms as law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms. We have those freedoms because our Constitution says it, because God has given them to us, and to protect ourselves.
But, Andy, some states don't have that. Some states, you got to be 21. You have to be 21 to drink. As far as alcohol is concerned. Yeah. So this is a difference. In this particular case in Texas, this may have prevented that shooting. As far as being, and if you're 18 years old, you're probably living with your parents. And if your parents want to buy the gun, we're talking only about an AR-15.
Well, obviously, this was a troubled young man, and a very troubled young man, 18 years old. I don't know if it would have prevented it or not. I don't think anybody knows that for sure, but I'll say this. 18 years old, my son will be 18 in July. He'll be eligible to be called up to the draft and go to war and carry a gun in that case. I don't believe in stripping rights.
If he does, then he would be I would give him an exemption because he would be trained by the U.S. military, which is a different thing. But listen, I appreciate your thoughts on this, and I appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Gipson,
appreciate
you. Got it, man.